Our story begins in a small, quiet Appalachian town in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, during the 1800s. It's the dead of winter and the air is crisp and biting, the kind of cold that seeps through heavy winter clothing, causing your nose to run. You get the picture. The snow blankets the rolling hills under a soft winter sun. Smoke curls from the chimneys of modest farmhouses. You can hear the distant whistle of the wind. Life here moves at a slow, predictable pace. It's governed by the seasons and the cycles of farm life. Very quaint, like a Norman Rockwell painting. This is the story of one mother who solved the case of her daughter's death in 1897. Or did someone else solve the case? Jacob Hedges Heaster was born in 1847 in Virginia. He was a farmer in Greenbrier County. He married Mary Jane Robinson on November 3rd of 1870. The 1880 U.S. Census records show that Jacob was a 32-year-old farmer living with his wife Mary Jane and their children in Meadow Bluff, Greenbrier County. The Heaster family lived a typical rural life in the 19th century, with Jacob working hard to support his large family. They had at least 9 children. Alfred, John, Elva, Louis, Harold, and Lenny were among the 9 that we know of. In 1896, Elva Zona Heaster, one of their children, was a vibrant young woman known to her friends simply as Zona. She was 23 years old, fair-skinned with beautiful auburn hair. Her hair framed a face full of warmth and curiosity. She had a gentle laugh and she was beloved by her community and cherished by her family. Her life in Greenbrier County was simple and it revolved around her church and the small community living. She had an independent spirit, a quick wit, and a laugh that could fill a room. She was a bright light, full of potential and eager for life. She met a man that summer named Erasmus Shue, also known as Edward or his nickname Trout. Their meeting was serendipitous, with some accounts suggesting they crossed paths during errands in town. For Zona, Edward was a whirlwind romance, a man who brought excitement to her quiet life. Edward Shue was the new blacksmith in town. He had the confidence of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. His presence in town was both magnetic and unsettling. He was a man with rugged good looks and an air of mystery. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes and a confident charm that turned heads wherever he went. To the townsfolk, he was a traveler with a past that he rarely spoke about. For Zona's mother, Mary Jane, there was an unshakable unease about Edward from the very beginning. He carried himself with a swagger that bordered on arrogance, and there was a darkness in his eyes that Mary Jane couldn't ignore. Mary Jane Heaster was as steadfast as the Appalachian hills themselves, a woman of strong convictions. She knew her daughter's heart, but doubted Edward's. She had raised Zona to trust her instincts, and yet Mary Jane's warnings fell on deaf ears. Their courtship was brief, and despite objections from Zona's mother, the couple married on October 26, 1896, a modest ceremony just weeks after their initial meeting. The wedding was rushed, but some believe that Zona seemed happy and content. On the morning of January 23, 1897, it was a very cold day. The stillness of winter had set in. The sun barely pierced the thick clouds. Edward was working and decided to send a young local boy to his home to check on Zona. He was an 11-year-old boy named Andy Jones, who was a neighbor of the Shues. He often helped around the house with chores. The boy didn't expect anything unusual, but as he approached the house, he noticed the door slightly opened. It made him nervous. Something about the quiet unsettled him. The front door creaked open with the boy's hesitant push, revealing an interior as silent as a tomb. What he found was horrifying. Zona's lifeless body was sprawled at the foot of the staircase, her head laid at an unnatural angle, twisted as though by an unseen force. Her arms were outreached, fingers curled slightly, as if frozen mid-gesture, reaching for something or someone. The boy's heart started pounding. As he caught his breath, he stumbled backwards before fleeing to find Edward. He ran through the streets crying out to the neighbors for help. Andy rushed home and told his mother what had happened. Immediately, Andy Jones and his mother set off down the street to a shoes blacksmith shop, where they informed Zona's husband of the tragic discovery that they had made. When Edward arrived, his reaction was swift and dramatic. He was visibly upset, his emotions inconsolable. He held Zona's body, cradling her head, sobbing uncontrollably. The scene was both heart-wrenching and unnerving. When Dr. George Knapp was called to examine her, perhaps swayed by Edward's overwhelming grief or his own unease, he only conducted a superficial examination. Initially, he attributed her death to everlasting faint, or possibly changing it to childbirth complications later on, despite no evidence that Zona was pregnant. Edward's control over the situation became apparent. He insisted on dressing Zona himself, choosing a high-necked gown. He wept openly and refused to let anyone near her, claiming she deserved dignity in death. Oddly enough, Edward prepared Zona's body for burial himself. She was buried the next day in the local cemetery. For most in the community, her death was a tragedy, but for Mary Jane Heaster, it was the beginning of a fight for the truth. Zona was buried hastily, her passing marked by tears and unanswered questions for Mary Jane. Mary Jane, mourning the loss of her daughter, was unlike the quiet grieving of others. Hers was sharp, persistent, driven by a gnawing intuition that her daughter's death wasn't an accident. She couldn't shake the feeling. Zona had been vibrant and healthy. The circumstances of her death and Edward's strange behavior gnawed at her. Every detail felt wrong. Why had he been so insistent on dressing Zona's body himself? Why had Dr. Knapp performed such a superficial examination? Mary Jane prayed nightly, her grief tinged with a growing determination, pleading for a sign, a revelation, a way to know what had truly happened to her daughter. And then, according to her own accounts, her prayers were answered in the most startling way. Mary Jane went to the local prosecutor, John Preston. John was a pragmatic man. He was initially skeptical, but Mary Jane's conviction and Edward's suspicious behavior convinced him to act. Preston agreed to reopen the case. He ordered Zona's body to be exhumed for a thorough autopsy. Exhuming the body drew a crowd, and whispers spread like wildfire through the community. When the autopsy findings were revealed, the truth was undeniable. The autopsy revealed the unmistakable evidence of foul play. Zona's neck had been broken, her windpipe was crushed, and ligature marks suggested strangulation. The high-collar dress Edward had insisted she wear now seemed like a deliberate attempt to hide the evidence. The findings sent shockwaves through the community. Edward Shue was arrested shortly thereafter, and the town buzzed with speculation, while the autopsy provided physical proof. Edward Shue stood trial for the murder of his wife. The trial began in April of 1897. The courtroom was packed with curious onlookers. It was a hive of tension. Locals packed the gallery. Edward sat rigid. his once confident demeanor replaced by a sullen arrogance, his expression a mix of defiance and unease. His eyes darted across the room, landing occasionally on Mary Jane, whose calm resolve was never wavered. The prosecutor outlined the autopsy findings with precision: a broken neck, crushed windpipe, ligature marks. The physical evidence was damning. Mary Jane took the stand. Her testimony had the attention of everyone in the courtroom. It began one cold January night. As I lay in bed, the air around me seemed to shift. A small chill swept through my bedroom, an unnatural cold that froze the air. The room grew colder, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls as a faint glow appeared at the foot of my bed. The shadows deepened around me. It slowly emerged into a familiar figure. It was Zona. "Mother," the ghost whispered, her voice carrying sorrow. Over the course of the next 4 nights, Zona's ghost returned to me. She spoke in hushed, mournful tones, recounting the horrors of her final moments. Edward, she revealed, had been a cruel and abusive husband. On the night of her death, a minor disagreement over dinner had erupted into violence. In a fit of rage, Edward had seized her by the neck and twisted with such force that he snapped her spine. Her ghost demonstrated this to me, turning her head at an unnatural angle to reveal the break. The details were vivid, precise, and chilling. This was no dream. I knew I couldn't ignore this. Zona's spirit had come to me for a reason. It was a plea for justice. Her testimony transfixed the room. She recounted Zona's ghostly visitations, her voice steady and clear, her words laced with conviction. It was Mary Jane's ghostly testimony that captivated the public's imagination. The prosecution focused on the physical evidence, while Mary Jane's account of the ghost's revelations lingered in the minds of everyone present. Edward's defense mocked her as a grieving mother clinging to fantasies. They painted Mary Jane as a delusional mother, but her testimony was unwavering and calm with precision. The jury was moved. The ghostly details aligned too closely with the forensic evidence to dismiss it. The courtroom buzzed with an almost palpable tension as the jury deliberated. The deliberation was swift. After just 1 hour, the verdict came in. He was found guilty. Edward Shue's sentence was life in prison. There was a quiet but resounding victory for Zona's memory. The night after Edward's conviction, a lynch mob formed outside the jail cell in Lewisburg. They sought to hang the evil Edward Shue. To keep the mob away, deputies were forced to fire guns in the air and threatened to kill members of the angry mob if they came any closer. Edward never got the chance to marry 7 times and father dozens of children. He died less than 3 years later in 1900, while an inmate at the West Virginia Penitentiary in Moundsville, after succumbing to a disease he contracted while incarcerated. His body was burned and his ashes were placed in an unmarked grave on the prison grounds. Zona's ghost was never seen again, and Mary Jane believed her daughter's spirit had finally found peace. But the story of the Greenbrier ghost lived on, passed down through generations as a chilling reminder of the thin line between the natural and the supernatural. Even today, the tale of the Greenbrier ghost raises questions. Was it truly a ghostly intervention that solved the case? Or was it Mary Jane's intuition coupled with Edward's suspicious behavior? Perhaps the dead do speak if we're willing to listen. The story of the Greenbrier ghost endures, not merely as a tale of the supernatural, but as a testament to a mother's unyielding love and the pursuit of truth in the face of doubt. Today, just off Interstate Route 64 in West Virginia, a state historical marker stands to commemorate the only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped to convict a murderer. Thank you for watching.